I am that I am. The will of I am. I give all I have till the war is done. I give all I have till the war is won. I will not lose, William. Good morning, family. It is July the 11th. It is 4:16 in the AM. This is an official and legal transaction. Today I am documenting and declaring and stating and executing a legal transaction to all of you family members of Beverly Webb Leggett, Aura Lillian Leggett, Frank E. Leggett Jr., Evelyn Webb, and John Webb, Gertrude Wilson, and John O. Wilson, Ethel Brown Mason, which is Grandma Leggett's mother, just like Gertrude Wilson and John O. Wilson were on the east side of our city. Ethel Brown Mason and William Mason Sr., both of my great-great-grandparents. Grandma Leggett's father and mother raised her and her family on the west side of town. And Grandma Webb was raised by John O. Wilson and Gertrude Wilson on the east side of town. And there is a financial wealth building instrument called a trust fund. And more importantly, an endowment fund. An endowment fund has trustees, and then it has beneficiaries. A trustee manages and grows the fund by only putting into the fund an initial principal investment was made. Grandma Leggett came from a huge family. My grandfather Leggett came from a huge family. But because there was an active sterilization plan going on, an active sterilization plan that was going on, My grandmother Leggett desired to have a huge family like Evelyn Webb did. Evelyn Webb came from 10, 8, 9, 10, something like that. And then Evelyn Webb had 10. Grandma Leggett was the baby of 8. My grandfather Leggett was at the top of either 8 or 9 siblings. He was like the third child, second child, third child. In both of their families, we have a Queen Elizabeth. We have never acknowledged any other Queen Elizabeth other than the Queen Elizabeth Ruby, Grandma Leggett's oldest sister, is Queen Elizabeth Ruby. And my grandfather Leggett, he had sisters that moved into White City, went to Hamilton High School, worshiped in St. Philip's Church, lived on Berg Avenue, but because his sisters and he was the only son, and he had 7 or 8 sisters. At least 3 or 4 of them are still living right now. My Aunt Louise Leggett. But because these queens got married, our Webb and our Wilson family throughout the city and town, you have no idea that you are interacting with our family, because these queens' last name is something else when they're at Hamilton, when they're raising their children at Hamilton High with Grandma Webb and them children. And they're worshiping in St. Philip's, but they have a different last name. It's not saying Leggett now. Living right there on Berg Avenue. We just had a cousin that came to Grandma Leggett's funeral 2 years ago and then passed away with cancer last year. Passed away from cancer last year, right there on Berg Avenue. Been living there on Berg Avenue, a part of our family. So what I'm saying to us as a family is, my grandfather and my grandfather's family, when they came from the West, where they were raised, and came to the East in our neighborhood where John O. Wilson and Gertrude Wilson had put down their roots, our grandparents, my grandfather and grandmother, they loved everything that Gertrude Wilson and Evelyn Webb and John Webb had established. And so when our families merged through the marriage of Frank Leggett and Beverly Webb and Julie Webb and William Hunter, this was a merger and acquisition of all of our families, because they got married together. Aunt Julie and Uncle Billy and my mom and my father, they got married together. And so there are 4 of us that Mom went out of her way to let us know that these families have merged together. And she used God's son. She used God's son to let me know that her sisters and her brothers are not my uncles and aunts. Because there is a covenant between lion prides and there is a covenant in the Bible with Queen Esther that these women make covenants with each other when they have children, so that if something happens to one of the queens, the other lioness and the other lion king will bring those cubs that they have already been raising as one family unit, and they will bring them into their household, and they will continue being their son and daughter, their lion prince and lion princess. If God forbid something happens to the lioness, the sister, and she passes away from a hunt, my mom used the story of Queen Esther to teach me a principle about Billy, Mathel, Maurice. Billy Hackett had Grandma Hackett also. Just like I had Grandma Leggett and Grandma Webb there, Billy had Grandma Webb and Grandma Hackett. Mathel had Grandma Webb and Grandma Hunter. And Reese and Stan and Treat had Grandma Webb and Aunt Honeybee and Dent. Aunt Rose's family was in Trenton. So Mom used the four of us to let me know, before I was even born, her and her brothers and sisters were already sharing their children. So when I got there, I believe I am the 16th. I believe I am number 16, if I'm not mistaken. That's including Champ. That's including our brothers and sisters that Uncle Butch has. That's from Stan, Treat, Dave, Delphia, and coming all the way down. I believe I was the 16th. And so the reason I'm saying this is because when our family came together between that merger, my mom went out of her way to go into and show me the biblical covenants that Elizabeth and Mary had. The biblical covenants that Hannah, when she couldn't have a child, and she went and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed, and she made a covenant vow at the temple, and the priest, God sent the priest Eli to tell her, God has heard your prayer. May it be to you. May you have the desires of your heart. Whatever that thing that you were praying for, and whatever you told God you were going to give God, and whatever you asked God for, God has granted that thing. And what Hannah made, Paul, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, did this same exact covenant with God. It's called the Nazarite covenant, or it's called the Garden of Eden covenant. Samson's mother made this same exact covenant. You see it all throughout the word. There's a man named Jabez. Whenever they wanted to take and demonstrate that they needed a extra special blessing from God, because maybe the people were in bondage, maybe the people were being attacked, maybe the crops were failing, maybe there was famine. And so at various times, specific individuals would go and say, hey, listen, I need an extra special blessing. And they would all go to this particular covenant. And so then when God says to Jacob, because Jacob made this covenant too, when God gave him the vision, God said, I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob, thy father, for the mouth of the Lord have spoken it. I will feed you, the descendants of Jacob, with the heritage. So God was saying, Jacob made a covenant with me, and I accepted that covenant. And I am going to honor the covenant that Jacob made with me to his children who make that same covenant. God called that a heritage. I will feed you with the heritage. We don't have culture. The root word of culture is hidden. So when God says what's done in the dark shall be brought to the light, he said the secret things that men do in secret, I will expose it. Have nothing to do with the worthless deeds of darkness, but expose it. That's another text. These are all texts that my mom took me to when I was between the age of 2 and 6. When my dad was in a theological seminary, my mom taught me the principles that she was gleaning while being in the environment of a theological seminary. And all of the principles that she learned, she taught to me instead of putting me in preschool and elementary school. But greater than just teaching me the principles, she wanted me to know when your grandparents and my mother and father got together, when it was time for us to get married, they made a similar covenant to each other about what their families would do if one of them, and Pop Webb passed away almost immediately. Almost immediately. And so the covenant agreement that our family has is Grandma Webb was the breeding school. Because Grandma Leggett, for some reason, once again, there was an active sterilization. After World War II, they were actively spraying the people with DDT. The chemical agent that they put and created Agent Orange in Vietnam War and World War II. This is documented U.S. history. They brought the scientists from Germany to the United States of America, to Huntsville, Alabama, Redstone Arsenal. The same ones that made the gas so that Hitler could exterminate the population in Germany that had birth defects. The population in Germany that had diseases and illnesses that went contrary to the lie that they were the master race and all of this. So that's who they were exterminating, but they couldn't kill people fast enough. So they created a gas called Cyclone G. Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun and Walt Disney. This is why you have a Space Coast. This is why you have a Space Coast in Central Florida. The very first enterprise that Walt Disney entered into was the enterprise with Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun put his space and rocket center in Huntsville, and Walt Disney invested in the Space Coast and Walt Disney World and Busch Gardens and all that. That's PR. That's PR. It's documented history that when they were spraying those chemicals on the people, and then after Vietnam, they began spraying pesticides, the same pesticides they used, took those chemicals, they went from DDT to Agent Orange to pesticides called Roundup, so that the people would not object when the USDA was spraying it on the food. But there were populations of animals, the peregrine falcon, in the northeast coast was driven to the brink of extinction because the eggs shells were so thin because of that poison that was seeping into the water source. And then when the fish that the falcon was eating went into their bloodstream, it affected their reproduction. They could not reproduce falcons. The peregrine falcon, Anatom. The school that Terry and I went to is Pine Forge Academy. Peregrine falcon Anatom, PFA. The bird was extinct. What y'all don't realize is, if it had that effect on the birds, and we were eating that same exact, they're spraying it on our food. It's going into our water sources. So there were women who came from fertile families who then became infertile. There's many, many, many people in my grandfather's family who died from cancer. My grandfather directly died from cancer. Cancer ate my grandfather up. This injustice was the covenant that Evelyn Webb and John Webb and Ora Leggett and Frank E. Leggett, looking at the biblical example of what Esther's uncle and aunt did, they followed the biblical principle and they put in the same exact family structure. and said, Miss Webb, you'll be the breeding. You have all of the children, you have all of the brothers and sisters, and we now live in Hamilton with y'all. And we have the financial resources to be the training school. You're the breeder, we're the trainers. The Legettes and Masons, we will train, we will invest in Bev, we will invest in Frank, we will invest in all of y'all children, all of your grandchildren, every lad, Julie, Billy, there's no separation. Your breed, you're the breeder, we're the trainers. Grandpa Webb passes away. My grandfather Legette steps into the role. My grandfather Legette was a Marine. Uncle Butch served. Uncle Bruce served. I believe Uncle Charles served. And so my grandfather, until 1985, he honored his word to John Webb and took care of his daughter, Beverly, and gave her a wedding dowry. This is the financial piece that we're here to discuss. The wedding dowry, and all of my grandmother's brothers and sisters, most of them and most of their children, they, like my grandfather, they worked at the General Motors factory in Trenton, New Jersey. So they had access to more disposable wealth than Grandma Webb and Grandpa Webb did, who had 10 children. And so when my mother and father went to college, my grandparents and my grandmother's sisters and brothers and all of them, they financially made sure that my dad and my mom could study and not have to worry about bills. So that when he was going into the ministry, Mom also could focus on the school, which is the financial covenant that I'm bringing to you here today. The school that Mom went down. And because my grandfather died, who was the financial backbone of that family, he died early in 85, cancer 80 months. Changed our family's financial situation. Immediately. Because the school that Mom went down there to start, my grandfather was going to back it and fund it. So when that happened, my grandmother and my mom began an investment strategy. My grandmother tried to invest in the stock market. Some guy by the name of Shapiro got her for a nice chunk of money. And then she decided to invest in us. In my mom's dream and us. In every single entity. My father was on a radio station, WIMG, when he had his first church. My mom created a company. For a radio station for a choir that they were in when they were in college. My father was on television. My father had a television broadcast show called Frankly Speaking. In 1999, when Grandma Webb passed away, my mom called me up. She said, create a studio. So all of the schools that I went to, Pine Forge Academy and Oakwood, they are schools of the arts. This is why Mom wanted us to go there. Schools of the arts, acting, drama, singing, choir of the world, everywhere. We're known all over the world for drama and singing, all throughout history. Choir of the world, right now. And they have never, ever, ever recorded. They don't have studios. They don't have film studios at the high school. They don't have film and record studios at the college or the university level. So my mom told us to create them. She literally created. I went down, filed the document. She gave me the name. She made me go get the license. I still got it to this day. Hollywood Studios. Hollywood Pictures. Hollywood Studios. So we have a family endowment that invests in studios, an endowment fund for these institutions and these women that she loved. So there's a choir director at Pine Forge Academy that's dead and gone now, Gwen Foster. There's a choir director at Oakwood, Alma Blackman. She's dead and gone. The original choir director of the choir that my mom joined, called the Aeolians. Xavier just graduated from that school. The Aeolians are one competition, choir of the world. And so my mom saw decade after decade after decade that nobody was making an investment in these schools. So she said, as an alumnus, as an alumni, pull together our resources and we'll give an endowment back to the institution that we love. And we'll run these institutions and businesses, and the institutions will be the beneficiary and you be the trustee of the endowment. And when we put money and you put your sisters and your uncles and your family members. So I'm coming to you all today to let you know that Beverly had a vision and a dream and a plan. And when I went to school to get my master's, and when she came to our wedding, and when the whole family was at the wedding, and all of the members that were in my wedding party are our brothers and sisters from these institutions, that she has also made the same covenant that she made with her brothers and sisters with their mothers and fathers as well. Craig Morgan, my mom and Craig Morgan's mom made the same covenant that if something happens to your sons, I'll raise your sons as mine. If something happens to you, Bev, I will raise your children as my own children. Unfortunately, Mom Morgan passed away right after our high school, so Mom kept her word. And if Mom was alive today, if my mother, Beverly Webb, was alive today, Catherine Morgan's grandchildren will be treated exactly like her own grandchildren. And so I am transferring the management of the endowment, and I will go asset by asset. And I am going to declare here today, this is a will and testament. This was her will. This was Ora Leggett's will. This is Frank E. Leggett Jr.'s will. This is Reginald Leggett's will. My Uncle Reggie as well. I am going to give the dollar amount and the valuation of the business plans within this trust, and I am transferring it to each of the 16 branches and each of the 16 banks within our family tree. We've broken these families down. The Webbs, the Wilsons, the Leggetts, Masons, my wife's 4 families, Lumpkins, Sally's, based off of, this all came from Mom and principles that she found in the Word. All right? How we structured this, how we're supposed to transfer it. There are 16 different gemstones that make up the foundation of the kingdom in heaven. It's spelled out in Revelation. 16 different gemstones. They only spell out 12 of the 16 gemstones under the gates of the city. But on the ephod that David wore, the breastplate that was full of gemstones, you find the other 4 gemstones that makes the 16. 16 gemstones. The foundation of the kingdom in heaven is 16 gemstones. And we've taken these 16 gemstones and we've assigned a family to each gemstone. 16 different. And today, you will decide if you want to let this family trust fund, endowment fund die, or if you want to take over management by investing each family. We no longer are going to be the sole family that invests into this trust fund. I'm proud to say that after Shawnee passed away, before Shawnee passed away, at Aunt Diane's funeral, I was riding in the back seat after the repast behind Billy Hackett and Desiree. Desi and Bill, I'm in the back seat, just listening. And clear as day, I knew exactly what my mom would want me to do. Clear as day. All I was thinking about is if Mom was here and we just buried Diane, all I could think of in that back seat was how Mom would be reacting if she was the one that was still alive when Diane was buried. And I knew then Mom would want us to have every single thing that we had going, that Jonna Wilson and Gertrude Wilson and Evelyn Webb and Maggie and Poppy and Uncle Poppy and Aunt Ola and Aunt Dot, Aunt Gert, that they all had going on in our neighborhood with the rec center, with the church, with the family and friends days, with the family reunions, I knew then Uncle Butch and Aunt Diane with the Parks and Recreation leagues that we played in. Uncle Butch was the commissioner of our leagues in our neighborhood. He organized our leagues every year. Uncle Butch took over the role that Uncle Poppy was doing in their generation. And I told Bill, I'm coming home. But then Jen passes away, then Uncle Butch passes away, and then Shawnee, Diane, Jen, Butch, Sean. And after going down with Shawnee, we as a family said no more trauma. We as a family, when we were down there in Miami, we said no more trauma. No more trauma to the Hackett's. No more trauma to Bill. No more trauma to Maddie Matt. No more trauma to Shay. No more trauma to Sean. No more trauma. None. Zero. None. We're going back to the blueprint. None. I called Aunt Libby. I called Aunt Colleen. I called Uncle Bruce. Met with Bill over and over and over and over and over again leading up to the event that we did a year ago. Met over and over and over and over again on the phone with Nikki and Naeem. Nikki and Naeem came up physically, not playing, no more trauma. This is our movement, family. This is this endowment fund. And then when we put the call out to the family, Nate and Darnell responded, Reese and Kels, Montia, Jody, Larry, Vince, Shay. I said Montia. Kyra and Lil Reese. Of course, me and my family. And in just 1 year's time, we have created a family entity. And out of that event, a loyal customer of Bill at Razor Sharp and the backbone of my father's ministry in the church that he started in East Trenton on East Clinton Avenue. It was called East Trenton Ephesus SDA Church. Evelyn Harris. Evelyn Harris was the elementary school the daycare teacher at the school that Terry and I went to in Trenton. We didn't go to Wilson. We went to Grandma Legette's church, had its own educational complex. Grandma Legette's church had its own educational complex. And Miss Evelyn Harris, who was a teacher at Junior 2 for years. So she's an educator. She left private school and started teaching public school. But she is a community development master. When she was teaching at that elementary school, she was holding church services in her house. She would teach the school, teach the babies at the school Monday through Friday. But because she lived on Walnut Avenue, she was like, there's people on Walnut Avenue that's not going to travel all the way over to 35 Arlington Avenue on the west side to go to Mount Sinai. So on the weekend, she held church in her living room. Evelyn Harris. Out of her own money, Evelyn Harris and her husband set up tents on Walnut Avenue in the summertime. To feed the babies of individuals who were struggling with crack addiction. She said she would come out of her house in the morning and just see babies, young kids. It's the summertime. Their parents wasn't at work though. Their parents were struggling with addiction. This is the 80s. It's the height of the crack epidemic on Walnut in the 80s. Y'all already know how it was. And Mom Harris like, I'm not about to get up every day and come out. I'm out of school. Mom Harris went and got her own tent. We're about to do this. Just letting y'all know. All over the country. Starting today. Today. Mom Harris put up tents. We're going to put up a tent in zip codes all over the country. Wherever we live, we're recreating our city around you wherever you live. We're going to transplant our city to wherever individuals who came from our city live anywhere in the country and in the world. And the foundation, the community recreational centers, the parks and recreation, the church, the high schools, the middle schools, the elementary schools, teaching arts, and then the community development. So why did she put a tent up? She put a tent up so that the meals that she was preparing and feeding the kids, she could do outside in the public and just have everybody from the block come down there to the tent. So people was lined up down. This is just out of her own pocket. And at the time, Mayor Doug Palmer, the one black mayor that was in Trenton, started sending people from his office to see, what's going on over there? And when he saw, and he had somebody come check her out, he said, Miss Harris, we're gonna send you food. If you gonna do that every day, the city gonna send you food. But after the summer was over, that was going to end. So the tents was a temporary thing to be able to have access to the people and have people have access to resources. And then she went and invested out of her own money and bought a building, a community recreational center that we called the center, to be able to do services year round. She worshiping on the weekends out of her house. She teaching the kids vacation Bible school underneath the tent, teaching them stories out of the word. When she not feeding, she teaching the kids Bible stories. Then got a building so that she could put computers in it. Mom Harris was teaching computers and computer literacy in the 80s and the 90s, yo. With the old floppy disk and all that. Mom Harris probably had the very first science, technology, engineering, arts, and math lab. Mom Harris probably had the very first science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Before anybody was on that, she was on it. Then she started creating transitional houses for the different pockets of demographics of individuals on Walnut that was struggling. So, struggling with addiction, men, got a house for men. Women struggling with addiction, a house for women. Felons coming out of prison, you want to try and get back on your feet and try not to reoffend and go back in, house for inmates. Mental illness. These were called Harris houses. Now we call them Adonai houses. This is all under the same endowment. Mom Harris was the very first community service director in my father's church. So when my father opened up that church, she brought the people that she had in her house and everything that she was doing into that church. And in the year-round operation that she was already doing, she began doing it, and this became her home church. And for 50 plus years, she's been doing it. So when we came back and started talking about no more trauma when Shawnee passed away, I have been trained to pause and honor what these women have done, because society, even in the Bible, society never counted the women and the children. All throughout the Bible has erased women. That's a choice that was made in 1611 when King James wrote that Bible. That's what y'all need to understand. The spirit of those that wrote that book in 1611, they tell you that they got the same spirit of the apostles that died. That's what they tell you. But the actual life that we saw the Son of God display, it's the opposite. He was always going and making the women whole. He was always challenging the men to love their wives like he loves the women in his life. He had an aunt, Elizabeth, John the Baptist's mother, his mother, Mary. Husbands, love your wives. You need to raise the bar. So when I verbalized and I said Mom Harris's name, and I went down a list of the queens in our lives that had trained us up right, I took the time to mention them, the queens. Because if you know anything about us real husbandmen, we don't need no credit. I do not share the same spirit of King James. I share the same spirit of the King of Kings, who spoke out of his mouth to John on the Isle of Patmos. I do not share the spirit of King James in England. I share the spirit of the King of Kings, who had the double-edged flaming sword in his mouth. That's the spirit we share. So today, I began the process last year to bring public this endowment fund. I called Uncle Bruce. I told Aunt Colleen. I told Aunt Libby. And now publicly, your nieces and nephews have responded. There are 50 of us on payroll. And it's time for the rest of the family to respond. It's time for the rest of the family. We have a sponsorship campaign. Xavier has a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful young lady in his life named Danielle Buckner. My son Xavier and Danielle Buckner graduated Oakwood University together. And Danielle Buckner and Xavier Leggett have the opportunity to chart the same course that Beverly and Frank intended to chart. But now we have resources that Beverly sacrificed and Aura sacrificed so that we can resurrect the family businesses. And do y'all know that it says, the Bible says in Leviticus 23, there's a financial covenant that Mom taught me that is incorporated into this endowment fund. And we have a PhD financial literacy university teaching the financial principles of this endowment fund to anybody that wants to be made whole financially in 3 to 5 years. We make a covenant with anybody coming into our transitional houses that it will only take us 3 to 5 years to make you 100% whole financially with the principles that my mother has gleaned out of the word and that are the bedrock of this endowment fund. Every person gets a 3 to 5 year business plan the minute they become an employee. Maurice Webb is an employee. Nate Webb is an employee. Darnell Webb is an employee. Right now, they're in the system on payroll right now. Terry Leggett, Israel Martin, Teresa Ganges. Every member of our family should be paid from this endowment. Every member of our family is designed to be a trustee. I mentioned Danielle Buckner because Danielle Buckner's parents have created they're the very first individuals who've taken their businesses and said they love what we're doing, and they have decided to become sponsors and help us provide the services in transitional houses that we are doing down here in Orlando, the same thing that Mom Harris started doing in Trenton. Transitional houses. And Danielle Buckner and Xavier Leggett are on payroll in our family endowment fund. Montia, Little Reese, Kyra, Little Bill, Jalen, Little Mathel, all of Darnell's kids, every child in this family their Aunt Bev stated that each and every one of them is supposed to be a trustee. You get paid to help manage the trust fund. And we have sponsorship. Danielle Buckner's father and mother both have separate businesses that are sponsoring what it is we do. And when a sponsor sponsors us, then when we provide services, we only use that sponsor to provide services. For instance, the only person who we will use in medical transport to transport individuals to and from our health clinic that Mom Harris, her passion is to open a health clinic to provide health services to the individuals in the houses. Because when you've done drugs and when you've been in prison and when you've lived a hard life, and so your body, your temple of God has been compromised. And Nikki has a movement called Know Your Bo. And I have a fitness movement called Let's Get in the Beginning Fit, a 90-day challenge. And so Know Your Bo and Let's Get I.T.B Fit, these health movements are going to be front and center in this clinic. But then these businesses that love what we're doing, they're putting up their money. They're bringing their resources. Danielle Buckner's father, his Lincoln dealership, is the sole transportation provider. And so now we can provide transportation services to our clients in these houses so that they can get jobs, gainfully employed. Danielle Buckner and Xavier Leggett have one school. I have 4 schools to cover all phases of life. 5 schools. Little Bryce is the very first school, like what Mom Harris and Mom Bev was creating. Bryce has a school. Little Damon has the next school, the elementary school. Destiny. And Destiny has a phenomenal young man in her life. They are all here and they are all on payroll. And today, we have to make a decision as a family to fund this payroll, then put the rest of the family on payroll, then launch this razor sharp, no more trauma lifesaver program. This is a camp that when Shay and them were living down here and Billy came down in 2009, Billy, Jen, brought all of the kids down, Sean, everybody, the whole Hackett clan came down. Shay and Monty and all of them were already living down here. Shay will tell you Mike was in camp and on the basketball team with Xavier, and Kanisha had a sister, Nellie, whose son was down here, and they all were in the camp with Xavier and Deja and all of that. And we have the number one, our lifesaver schools and academy are the number one in science, technology, virtual reality, augmented reality, robotics, Number one, hands down. There's no program in the world doing what we're doing. None. All year last year, the federal government had a program because the economy was shut down. There were 36, no, not 36 million. Yeah. 32 million. 32 million people. So that's like 10% of the country. It's like 300 plus million people in the United States. But 32 million of those 300 million, when they shut down the economy, they were so poor that they didn't have access to internet, cell phones, tablets. So those children, for 3 years, are 3 years behind everybody else. We're talking about families of 4 that make $30,000 or less. Talk about families of 2 that make $20,000 or less. We talk about a single individual that makes $13,000 or less. 32 million people were in that category. And so they launched a program last year claiming that they wanted to get tablets and phones and internet out to these 32 million people who, for 3 years, so just imagine if your child was already struggling in school and then they were home for 3 years and then they come back to school. Do you know that the educational system tried to make these kids go online and catch up all of those 3 years? And most of these children they're in poverty, so they're already challenged educationally. This is the demographic that our program has studied for years. In Harvard University did a study. Barack Obama, all of them know that there's a thing called dropout factories. They did a documentary after studying this phenomenon in like 2008, 2009 through 2012 during their first administration. And the documentary is called Waiting for Superman. And Waiting for Superman did the research on a paper that was released from Harvard that said there are forgotten middles. The forgotten middle school is the cause of people dropping out. And what happens when people drop out is 85% of the people who drop out, they become criminals and they commit crimes and go to prison. If 100 people are in a class, and if 85 of those 100 drop out, 85 of them are going to prison. If 100 of students drop out, 15 will not commit crimes, but 85 of the 100 will commit crimes and go to prison. So this means if there is not an economic development intervention for these 32 million individuals in the next 4 to 8 years, you are going to see a staggering amount of crime because they shut down the economy and let 3 years go by, and the poorest people cannot catch up in a year or two. And when those 85% begin committing the crimes, we said we're not even going to let that happen. So in this No More Trauma initiative, I partner with my alma mater, I have a school down here called Full Sail University that creates games, it's the #1 school in the world for video game development, for film development, all of the Grammys, all of the everything. I'm a 3-time graduate from Full Sail University. We have had a job fair going on with Full Sail University for the past month. Why? We created a game. We created a game for the 32 million individuals. A video game that each one of them has their own financial development profile within the game. And in 3 to 5 years, everybody who gets their game is guaranteed to make a minimum of $10 million in the business that is created in the game for them to run. It's a simulator. It is a business simulator. I don't care what their age is. I don't care what their background is. I don't care where they are. Whatever business they're passionate from, they can bring into their game. And in 3 to 5 years, every day they can plug into their game in virtual reality. We also have a sponsor. In virtual reality, you have to have a phone to power the goggles so that you can be in the totally immersed world and conduct business, shop. There's a video game called Sims, but more importantly, the video game that we pattern our stuff after is Minecraft, where you build your neighborhood, your community, your house, boom, 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 boom. So just like in Minecraft, 32 million people have their own gold rush. Just like there was a gold rush back in the day in the United States. And you had to create a business to go buy a plot of land, and then you had to go hire people to mine to be able to extract the gold and get Minecraft. Hip hop Minecraft. The last gold rush. We have 32 million. And each of you and our family members, you got one of the 32 million. And in order for this to happen, you all have to make your initial deposit into this No More Trauma. Razor sharp from the heart, No More Trauma. Sitting in the back of Billy's car as Aunt Diane, we were riding from, I said, my mother would be in overdrive right now, getting this family to go back to the roots, the building blocks of what had prosperity in our community, character development. Everybody in our family had their own business. Uncle Butch, Uncle Bub, every one of those businesses has invested in this. In 2014, 2015, I came back home with a business. And Aunt Julie, Aunt Diane, Reese representing Uncle Bub and Aunt Rose, Terry, they all came out and they signed up in this and in that business opportunity. And when we were in Chicago, Aunt Libby and Jasmine came down, sat down, broke down a business that they were doing, taught me the ins and outs of the business that they were doing, cleaning. To this day, right now, to this day, me and my partner, Craig Morgan, to this day, his family, after what Aunt Libby came, because Craig came to Chicago and lived with us for several years, we created an entity, Shine Doctors. To this very day, Craig gets contracts in Florida and does what Aunt Libby came and broke down and taught us and gave us the blueprint. Craig has mastered getting the contracts, getting the cleaning contracts. And this is another one of the main pillars that we're offering to the individuals in our transitional house. And in Florida, we focus on inmates. Inmates coming out. And this sponsor is a special sponsor. This sponsor is Pastor Anthony Lewis and Sister Edrene Lewis, who my mother loves with all of her heart, because they came down to Oakwood and they were our classmates when my mom and father were going to school. So the owner of the Android phones that are sponsoring our virtual reality, and we're going to use virtual reality to get our sons and daughters who are in prison and who have come home out of prison we got Darnell, who went in and came out. We got Tracy, who went in and came out. We got so many. We got Mike, who done went in. We have so many of our family members. The individual that Mom Harris Blueprint taught us to do community service to a level that when this man, Anthony Lewis, committed a crime, he came out of prison, and my father, Frankie Leggett, who was working with Evelyn Harris, told his college friend to come up to New Jersey and do an evangelistic series with him to get back on his feet and get back into ministry. And this family used that door of opportunity that was open because of the community service that Evelyn Harris was doing and the spirit of community service that Frank E. Leggett, our whole church, was adopting that same spirit of community outreach and service. And so when a former felon was trying to re-enter society and re-enter ministry, he got an opportunity to do that with us. And now the world in Orlando, Florida, inmates, there are 50 inmates in his transitional program that he does right here in Orlando, Florida, and that we're providing all of these services to. 12 houses with 50 inmates that he is giving the same opportunity to them that our family gave to him. And his wife is an educator. So the 5 schools that I told you, our children, his wife was running the school in Chicago when we were in Chicago. And so, from now on, as a family, This goes for Kenesha's family. I'm saying to my sister in Arizona, my godson, Nasio, what we're doing here this summer in two weeks with Damon, the kids from around the nation, we are going to allow the kids from around the nation to come down here with little Damon, and Xavier and Deja and Destiny, and all of them are running a camp. And just like y'all used to send little Reese and Kyra and all of them to us in the summer, now we're saying when you send your kids, and we're saying any razor sharp kids in Trenton that want to come and learn how to shoot film, how to record music, how to make video games, we're saying send those kids down here. I have created a fund to fund the education and camps at the school that I graduated from. What I'm telling you is that our family endowment is going to pay the tuition so that 32 million individuals who potentially would create crimes down the road, if somebody doesn't intervene, I'm saying our family, we're intervening, so there will be no more trauma. There will be no more of ours going into prison. If any of our children anywhere in the country get into trouble, listen, our kids do not go into prison systems so that they can make money off of our children. If our children anywhere, we have a legal team and an attorney. If your child, one of our children, get in trouble anywhere, they do not have a correction system. They have a system that monetizes private prisons. It are the greatest wealth thief from our community that they ever invented. So the rest of the world may be okay with them paying judges and attorneys and parole officers and police salary and paying and sending their kids to school at the expense of the poorest people in the country, but we not with that. So any of mine, anywhere, any of the grandchildren of any of the Webbs, the Masons, if you let anybody in our family go into the system with the amount of work that we have put. I have an uncle, Richard Bland, for 60 years. 60 years. He has independently provided rehabilitation in every state prison in the country and around the world. United Prison Ministry International. He marched in Selma across the bridge with Martin Luther King. They talking about John Lewis. John Lewis ain't never came in our community and did nothing. Our uncle, Richard Bland, for 60 years, has been rehabilitating prisoners by taking them through what the Bible actually says, and not traditions and superstitions that people believe that aren't even in the Word. And do you know how many lives have been transformed when they actually know what it actually says? He has a whole studio in Birmingham, Alabama. And all of these elders have simply reached out to me and said, man, we see the work that you're doing, and I'm getting so far up here in age that I want somebody to take over our legacy. And I'm telling you that our endowment fund is taking over and continuing the heritage of breaking cycles that these individuals in our family have invested in when the rest of the world has capitalized on the least of these our brethren. So today, July the 11th, there is a payment that I.T.B needs deposited. I have done everything that I'm supposed to do, and now it's time for the rest of us. We have a number, 321-387-5854. 321-387-5854. You are to text this number, 321-387-5854, so that we can assign you to the gemstone that's your family, and then you're supposed to put your family members in order from eldest to youngest. And the elders are going on the board. The elders are going on the board of Break the Cycle and Adonai to make sure that the children and the grandchildren execute everything, and then you will all be placed in the 5 different schools that Xavier and Deja and Destiny and Mayfie and Danielle Buckner and Bryce and Larry. Larry came down to Florida to see our operation last year. We reached out to Bernie, Maurice Webb, Nate Webb, Darnell Webb, have resurrected Webb's Construction, the construction company that Uncle Butch and Uncle Bub built all throughout, all homes all throughout. They have resurrected, and under Break the Cycle, we have a brick. We have a former one of the counselors in the same camp that we're offering. His name was Joshua Footman. Joshua Footman and his sister Ashley, they played on both of our basketball teams that Xavier and Deja played on. Joshua Footman and his sister Ashley. Ashley was a star basketball player. When I tell you, Ashley was a superstar basketball player. She was a pleasure to coach, just like Josh was a phenomenal teammate. What I didn't know when I asked Josh to help me run the very first camp, that Billy Hackett came and supported us as the business and the financial visionary. We had a business spotlight, so we focused on Billy and Razor Sharp as our economic spotlight of how young people could get out of inner city environments by getting a license to go into a barber shop, to license to cut hair, and then investing and opening up your own barber shop. We used Billy's story of Razor Sharp to inspire these kids. Like, yo, the selling drugs in Orlando, Florida is not the only option. I have a cousin who said college isn't for me. He went and got his barber license first, and then he invested and bought a building and opened up his shop, and the rest is history. You all can do that. So for the whole 6-week camp, Razor Sharp and Billy, and when Billy and Sean was here, they played basketball with us, and Billy ran the actual business development spotlight when he was down here on vacation. When he left, every time I did the business spotlight, I simply just told them the story of how Razor Sharp has changed the city that I come from, because so many other people followed Billy's example, and they are now cutting hair and have opened up other shops all throughout the city. They are feeding their families, and they are gainfully employed, and they are assets to the community. And they did not go to school. They did not go get a degree. They invest. They are investors in themselves and their communities. There is another option besides going to school. So we have a year-round program, and now we're saying our motto is to invest first into these resources, into our people, and then now, me and my family, we all did it without getting any income coming back. Now, when you guys make the same investment that our sponsors have done, the Buckners, providing our transportation, now, and we also have an even greater thing that Mom and Grandma Leggett created called angel investors. So when you're an angel investor, we treat you just like the stock market does. You get a dividend off of a sponsor. Might only put in, some sponsors are going to give us, just exchange services with us. Some sponsors will put up money. So we might have a diamond sponsor. They might put up $10,000. We might have a gold sponsor. They might put up $5,000. But if you're going to put up $50,000, $75,000, $100,000, we call that an angel investor. And then we pay greater returns than you can find in the stock market or anywhere. If you invest in our people, we're going to pay you back your return. We're going to give you a dividend, maybe say over 3 years, a monthly dividend. Then at the end of the 3 years, we're going to give you a balloon chunk of a return on your investment. And then we're going to give you the whole amount that you put and invested with us back. So say $100,000. You become Michael's angel investor. $100,000. We're going to pay you every month, let's say $1,500. Boom, 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 dividend for 3 years. Add that up, that might be $65,000, whatever it is, $35,000, $45,000, whatever it is. Then at the end of the 3 years, we're going to give you another $65,000 on top of that $35,000. Then we're going to give you $100,000 back. That's the angel investor. So we have Michael's Angels Investors. We have sponsors. And what I'm telling you is, as a trustee, you could be a trustee and be a sponsor. No, you're supposed to be a trustee and a sponsor. You're supposed to help us manage the day-to-day operation to make sure that we don't ever get in a situation where we don't control John O. Wilson Recreational Center again. So that we don't ever get into a point where we don't control St. Philip's Baptist Church. Where we don't own and operate East Trenton, Ephesus, Seventh-day Adventist Church. Never. That's a violation. Whether we don't own and operate Mount Sinai Educational Complex in Trenton or in Orlando, that's a violation. And right now, currently, we do not own and control those. And so Leviticus 23 says, on the 50th birthday, the lands of the fathers goes back to the children. The land of the fathers goes back to the children. And anybody that claiming that they're in a religious establishment that any of our fathers created, the only people that can run an establishment with your father's name on it is the children of that father. Only the bloodline. This is what Leviticus 23 says. So there's some political stuff that you guys adhere to over and above the commandments in the Word of God. And I can tell you that the political garbage that you have put above God's Word is going to all burn in a lake, just with all of the documents that they created those political philosophies with. One political philosophy that y'all have adopted is that a corporation is a person too. They say this all the time during campaign time. A corporation is a person too. Well, you know what? Slavery was done. Transatlantic slave trade was corporate charters. Every corporation is an extension of the Pirates of the Caribbean slave trade vessels. The slave ship was the very first incorporation. They insured the cargo so that if the ship went down, the crown that invested in that ship to the voyage, they would go to the bank and the bank would pay them back. They insured each. That's where they created the Europeans created the corporation so that they can engage in the slave trade. And so when you go and you create your church is an extension of those slave ships. And so anybody, any of these denominations that come into your neighborhood and then they take over your family church in the neighborhood, they are violating the very commandment of God in Leviticus 23. By definition, you are a thief. The thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. There's no way that you can get around Leviticus 23. I know. Some people are going to go to the fact that, they're going to tell you, oh, that's in the Old Testament, it's done away with. Okay, well, tithe and offering, you collecting tithe and offering, that's in the Old Testament. The same people that want to come into your neighborhood and take your family church and then collect tithes to pay their salaries, they're going to tell you that Leviticus 23 was done away with, nailed to the cross, so that they could take your family church. So when you try and stand on the covenant that God told them after 49 years, sound the trumpet on the 49th, at the 10th month in the 49th year, it's called the Feast of Trumpets. My wife turns 49. Every address that my wife ever laid her head in, when she turns 50 next year, every address that we ever laid our heads in, what I'm telling y'all is, we 50, and every one of y'all above 50, we're going back and I'm reinstituting, reminding you of a financial covenant that God has with you and telling you, wherever Rose and Bub laid their head, the children of Rose and Bub can only own those properties. Nobody else can live in it based off of Leviticus 23. You can't move into our communities when our fathers have built it. You cannot immigrate here and move into our communities and then have presidents standing up there talking and swearing on a... Listen, every president agreed to be judged by what's in the book. You can't let individuals come here from other countries when our ancestors have built. That's what Leviticus 23 says. And that's the beauty of what Bev did. Bev sat down and said, yo, the word of God is based off commandments and principles. And if you know the commandments and principles, then you become a judge. There's a book of Judges. Moses set up the individuals in each tribe and family that knew the principles and lived by the principles. He appointed them judges over the nations, kindreds, tongue, and people, and all of the tribes. And the book of Judges is the individuals that held the people accountable when they went away from the principles and the covenant that God had established. What I'm telling you is my mother trained us all to be judges. And our grandmother, Evelyn Webb, and our great-great-grandmother. On both sides. All we're supposed to do is hold people accountable to the principles that they claim that they live by in a book. And they don't even know the principles in the book. So how can they be living by them? All we're supposed to do is stand on the principles. All right? So every family is supposed to make a monetary contribution. When you text this, what you're supposed to be texting me is each one of y'all is supposed to text and confirm that you want to receive your family's inheritance in this family endowment. And then we will give you the information to go and add your family contribution. We're going to send you right to the bank. Right to Bank of America. We're going to give you the account number and all of that. And we're going to let you and your family decide what your initial. And then we're going to sit down and we're going to put the elders on the board of directors. Because my kids will now manage, with the help of all of you, our kids are going to manage that which me and my wife have been using our kids to manage by ourselves. Now we're transferring it to Uncle Bruce and Aunt Colleen and Aunt Diane, and Aunt Libby and all of the elder, Aunt Rose, Uncle Charles, listen, Aunt Naomi, all of the elders will sit on the board of directors and make sure that all of us cousins and all of that, from eldest to youngest, get all of our sons and daughters and their wives and children, all of us, we will all identify with whatever gemstone and whatever pool of wealth comes from that gemstone. Each gemstone will focus on a different issue in our community. Each pool of wealth is a bank that will focus specifically on a specific transitional house. So your gemstone and your pool might be on the homeless house and on all of the resources for the people who are dealing with homelessness. Another gemstone will focus on inmates and putting their lives back together. And all of the pools of resources, this is why everybody got to be on board. All right? So I'm going to go through each of the individual, and I'm going to break down how much the endowment is worth based off of the assets here. But y'all gonna take this video and this information, and today, y'all gonna make a commitment. Y'all gonna text 321-387-5854. Then we're gonna deposit the money in Bank of America, and we're gonna tell I.T.B to, on Friday, pay Terry, pay Reese, pay Nate, pay Kanisha, pay Xavier, Deja, Destiny, everybody already in the system. And then we're going to have them and our HR department put the rest, everybody in the family in the system. They were hired first. You have to do everything decently and in order. So there's no way for us to do everybody all at the same time. So little by little by little, we sent the message out to everybody in the family during Shawnee's thing. And so we just started with those that responded directly. And for a whole year, we followed up, we followed up, we followed up, we put the entities together, we followed up, and now we're here. It's time to get down to business. And the greatest thing that we're gonna do underneath those tents, and I'm gonna say this and let y'all go, we're gonna have our own neighborhood games. During the same time that the Olympic Games is going on, all over the country, in Atlanta, in Huntsville, in Compton, in LA, with Curtis Spiderloak, in Trenton, in Brooklyn, in all over the country. First, we're gonna put the tents up, starting right now. And we're gonna register the people. We're gonna register those who gonna run in the games. We're gonna register those who gonna play basketball in the games. We're gonna register those who gonna play volleyball in the games. We're gonna register those who gonna come down here and learn the film and all that. We're gonna register everybody. And we're gonna have our own neighborhood games. And our challenge is to let's get in the beginning fit and know your bow, because there's too many of us that are dying early and prematurely. And so we're going to use recreation to reverse. We're going to take our diets, we're going to take our lifestyle, and then we're going to use Desiree's company to launch all of our fashion brands. We own everything in-house. Everything. Every fashion brand, every uniform, sneakers, everything. We own everything in-house. We own the leagues. We own everything. Everything. Okay? So from today till July, I think it's the 26th, is when our competition will start. We're gonna register under tents in your neighborhood. So y'all making deposits so that we can launch payroll, and so that then we could go leverage the funds in the endowment to rent this places where the tent is gonna go. Just like 4th of July came by and y'all all went and bought fireworks from people in tents on plots of land. We're going to rent plots of land, and in the heat, we're gonna put water out there. We're gonna have water festivals so that the people will come out and they'll register children and adults who wanna compete in our Know Your Bow and our Let's Get in the Beginning Fit 90-day challenge. And then those who compete in these games from 26th through August the 11th, then we're going to choose professionals who will play in those same sports year round and be paid to play and paid to supernaturally compete and supernaturally train and supernaturally have a supernatural plant-based healthy vegan diet, or as close to it as possible, that gives life and doesn't destroy your body and produce death. This is my challenge. This is our challenge. Today, we have to all make a decision on whether we want this endowment fund that Aura and Evelyn and John Webb and Frank E. Leggett Jr. and Aura Lillian Leggett looked at what their parents did and said, we need to make sure that our children and our grandchildren always, and the last text I'll give you is Proverbs 13, a good man leaveth wealth to his children's children. Leaves wealth. I have transferred the wealth from our grandparents to you. Now it's your job to receive it and do the same thing. Transfer it. First, we have to transfer it to the least of these, our brethren. Then we get a return for being faithful servants. And then we can hand down that generational wealth in this model and cycle forever.